With the F1 2022 game just a few days away now, each and every driver on the Formula 1 grid this season just picked up their personal rating for this year. And well, it's going to get controversial. Let's start with how it works, because each driver actually gets 4 ratings out of 100. The first rating is for experience. That's just linked to the number of race starts they've had in their Formula 1 career. The second is their racecraft, their ability to make up positions on the race day when the points are available and when it counts. Number 3 is the awareness rating. That's their ability to reduce the number of errors that they have in their game, but also avoid the steward's room at the end of the Grand Prix as well. And then their final rating is out of 100 for pace. This is their one lap race pace, and their qualifying pace combined together is for the top drivers who can put in that absolutely electric lap. And then all 4 of those get culminated together in a final overall rating, which separates the best and the worst of the Formula 1 grid. Let's start off by looking at the experience ratings, because you can't really be too controversial here. If you've been in Formula 1 longer, you get a higher experience rating. And we can kind of see the dynamic between the teams, though, and how most teams have one experienced driver and one slightly fresher driver to their name, although Williams and AlphaTauri both running a fairly fresh driver setup over the course of this 2022 season. Then you've got the likes of Alonso, your Hamiltons, your Vettels, all over 90 in terms of their experience. They have definitely been around the block. And then we have that kind of next generation a little bit further down, your George Russells, your Charles Leclercs, your Lando Norrises, who I think will be those 90 rated drivers in a few years' time once they've got that experience and once the likes of Alonso, Hamilton and Vettel step aside. I think the outlier for me was Max Verstappen. I did not realize that he was the 8th most experienced driver on the grid. He is still so incredibly young, but we have to remember he came for it 17 years old. He is easily going to go on to fill that Fernando Alonso shoe as the 98 rated experienced driver. I feel like Racecraft is the first one where it starts to get a little bit tricky, especially because you have to kind of take into account the car that each driver is in as well over the course of the last few seasons, and whether or not those overtakes are really something that is going to happen. And after last year, I don't think you can argue against Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton being top of this. Like, Max Verstappen has been absolutely electric. We only have to look at Brazil last year for Lewis Hamilton to just know that these two sigh through the field when they get the opportunity. They are very, very good at going from the back to the front if they've got the right hardware underneath them. And actually, if you put the guys in order, you can see that between Sebastian Vettel and George Russell, it's very, very close between all of these drivers in that middle of the pack. Personally, when I first looked at this, I thought Lance Stroll, Pierre Gasly and George Russell were maybe a little bit higher on the list than I thought they were going to be, mainly because Gasly and George Russell in particular, I would maybe see them as more of a pace driver, a qualifying driver. But then I actually looked into the numbers, and Lance Stroll has the best average overtaking over the course of the season so far. He's gained more positions per lap than anybody else on the grid, and George Russell also has an exceptional record. Actually, George Russell in every single race this year has moved forward, so he's done very, very well indeed. I just feel a little bit sorry for poor little Yuki Tsunoda at the bottom of the list there. His overtaking hasn't been too bad. You look at Bahrain, you look at Imola, he's made up 8 places, 9 places in those races, but then I guess, yeah, 3 races he's gained positions, 4 races he hasn't, so hasn't been great from Yuki Tsunoda. Maybe we'll see a little bit more from him in the next couple of years. Although Yuki Tsunoda's awareness rating isn't too high either after all of those DNFs last year. He finds himself second bottom, though keeping yourself out of trouble does seem to lend itself to the more experienced drivers as well. We've got Daniel Ricciardo, Valtteri Bottas, Sebastian Vettel, Lewis Hamilton, all at the top of the awareness ratings, and that's because they have that bit more experience, and also they keep themselves out of the steward's room, because Fernando Alonso, the most experienced driver out there, in the middle of the pack for awareness, because he does just love a chat with the FIA towards the end of a Grand Prix. We've seen it in Miami, we've seen it in Canada. He loves to pick up a penalty, does Fernando Alonso. But if you look at the teams, it's generally the case where you have one driver more experienced and more aware, the sort of the safer driver that's going to get the car home, and then one driver who's a little bit less experienced and has that lower awareness score, who maybe crashes the car just a little bit more often. Just looking at Mick Schumacher as maybe the example of that, where in comparison to Kevin Magnussen, who's a little bit more experienced, also has that higher awareness. And then the one for me, Nicholas Latifi, higher than Joe. I'm not so sure about that. Nicholas Latifi has been in the wall quite consistently over the start of this season, whereas Joe obviously only has 9 Grand Prix to his name, but hasn't really made any mistakes, and I think should maybe have a little bit higher of an awareness rating, although he is a rookie. And last but most definitely not least is the pace rating. And in fact, I think this is probably the most important rating you can have as a racing driver. Your qualifying ability. Can you get that car into Q3, into Q2 when it really shouldn't be there? Can you pick up those pole positions and start at the front of the grid? Give yourself the best opportunity to win those races. And of course, fastest laps. Can you put in that really quick lap? Can you get to within DRS of your opponent? Give yourself that opportunity to get that overtake done. I think pace is so incredibly important. And looking at the ratings, I think they've done pretty well with these pace ratings. I know it's tricky because you obviously have to take into account the car that they're in this year as well, but Lewis Hamilton and George Russell being equal, I think was one of the standout things for me. The fact that George Russell, yes, he has missed a Saturday, but being put on a level pacing with Lewis Hamilton is very, very impressive already from the British driver. And then Gasly and Tsunoda also being equal. I think in the opposite vein, Pierre Gasly was absolutely electric last year in qualifying. Not so sure how Yuki Tsunoda is almost equal with 83 points to Pierre Gasly. And then on top of that, the standout for me, Daniel Ricciardo, 5th slowest in terms of pace out of all the drivers on the grid in that McLaren car, while Lando Norris is the 5th fastest of anybody in terms of pace. Those two really far away from each other in the standings right now. And another little standout for me, Esteban Ocon. I don't know how he's in the bottom half of this. I know that he's not incredibly electric in qualifying, but he's always there in Q3, always gets the job done, puts in the laps when he needs to in the races as well. I'm not so sure he should be in the bottom half of this one. And of course, Charles Leclerc, maybe the most controversial one, is slower than Max Verstappen in terms of pace. He's picked up 6 pole positions already this season. We know that Charles Leclerc absolutely loves a qualifying lap. But Max Verstappen too last year was very, very quick. I think they should be on level pegging for me. I think maybe they could have met in the middle and put them both on 96 because they just both are absolutely rapid. And finally, as I said, they take all of those 4 ratings and combine them together into an overall rating. Max Verstappen, clearly the highest rated driver overall, the current world champion, so it makes perfect sense for him to be right at the top there. Lewis Hamilton just behind him, and then we can see that trajectory down the grid almost as we go through with the ratings. And looking at the rest of the overalls, I think they're pretty much spot on considering the weighting and obviously the cars that the drivers are in for this year. And seeing team by team as well, you can see that the big teams have a slightly higher rated setup. That does go into the game as well. You know, more people are going to want to play as Mercedes, Red Bull, Ferrari, so they kind of weight those drivers a little bit higher too. But overall, I'd say it's not too bad from EA, although I'm sure there's some controversy that will go down in the comments below. Let me know if I've missed some glaring error from EA, and let me know one driver who you think should be higher rated and one driver who you think should be lower rated in the comments down below. Whilst you're down there, leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and I'll see you next time.